Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
So the principle is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And I'm going to share again part of what I shared last week from the Reverend Emily Gage in Unity Temple in Chicago. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations points us towards something beyond inherent worth and dignity. It points us to the larger community. It gets at collective responsibility. It reminds us that treating people as human beings is not simply something we do one-on-one, but something that has systemic implications and can inform our entire cultural way of being, which I think is part of what has come up on, thank goodness, has come up on our radar screens again as something that we need to be giving careful attention to. Compassion. Compassion is something that we can easily act on individually. We can demonstrate openness, give people respect, and treat people with kindness on our own, but we need one another to achieve equity and justice. The opening words are number 597 in the back of your hymnal. And this is a responsive reading from the Dhammapada, the Buddhist holy book. Never does hatred cease by hating in return. Only through love can hatred come to an end. Victory breeds hatred. The conquered dwell in sorrow and resentment. They who give up all thought of victory or defeat may be calm and live happily at peace. Let us overcome violence by gentleness. Let us overcome evil by good. Let us overcome the miserly by liberality. Let us overcome the liar by truth.
chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat of not a weary feet, come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of a bright star is cast. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Our transitional words are very brief, but I think are among some of the most poignant and powerful that I have been aware of and familiar with for many, many years. Sharing the wisdom from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And with that, I would like to invite Melissa McCollister up to join us. She is a faculty member at ISU in the Department of Social Work and has been working in the areas that she will be sharing with us for a very long time. And we are so glad to have her here in our community.
Good morning. Before I get started this morning, I would like to state a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we gather here in the traditional land of the Delaware, the Chicopee, the Miami, the Mound Builders, Piankasaw, Potawatomi, Shawnee, and the Way Tribe. Peoples past and present, and honor with gratitude this land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. I want to thank Jean for asking me to be here today, and for all of you. It's good to see you. It's been hard to not be in congregation together and to be in such social isolation with one another. I'm a social worker, and so it's tremendously hard for us social workers that are used to being with one another to see such distance, and also to see such challenging times, to see people suffering and to see people without. I'm going to start with telling you just a little bit of a story about why I'm here, why I'm in Terre, Haute, why I'm at ISU as an assistant professor in the Department of Social Work, and why I am a community capacity builder for racial and social justice issues, which leads me to why I'll be talking about white privilege and white fragility. So I grew up in Northeast Ohio in Cleveland. Cleveland is home to many things, right? For those of you that know Cleveland, most people say, well, why would I ever go to Cleveland, right? We were known as the mistake on the lake. We were known as, so many different things. Our lake caught fire. right, back in the 80s and the 90s. And, we're part of the Rust Belt, and we're very gritty people. We know tragedy, but we also know commitment to community. And those of us that have been in the community and doing this kind of work for a really long time, have a very special connection to land. When we congregate together and when we come into community that is transformational and not transactional, you start to really understand the underpinnings of how important it is to know one another. And to truly know one another, authentically and genuinely in relationship. And unfortunately, in this nation, we've lost that way. We've lost our way in really truly understanding purpose and value, commitment. And what led me to Unitarian Universalism, I came from a long line of Baptist ministers. My mother's father was a Southern Baptist minister, and he's probably the greatest man I've ever known in my life. The most peaceful, social justice-oriented person, humble, which you wouldn't equate exactly with Southern Baptist, but he was. And I can't prove it, but it was always told in our family that we had a line of shaman and Cherokee Indian, but we are not in the book. But I learned different ways about nature and about land and about importance of belief, culture, ideology, and what brings people together. And I started out as an art major. I went to Cleveland Institute of Art. I was a fine artist, a painter, a sculptor, oil painter, and a love of symphonic music. I was in band and marched and did all of that kind of stuff too. But what always rang true to me was the relationships that you formed in those environments. What art does for you, it brings that wise mind together because it brings, the right and left of our brains, and not that dichotomous, but it brings this area of understanding what's so important about humanity. And it is our ability to love and to connect. And we've lost our way in doing that in our culture, in our ideology and beliefs. And so I came into Unitarian Universalism from being confirmed in the Trinity United Church of Christ. I am an out gay woman, and I use the term gay because I grew up in an era where the term lesbian was a very derogatory term, and I felt more comfortable with the term gay, and that has to do with ideology and culture. We live in an androcentric world, which is very male-dominated, a patriarchy, and so being gay is actually, more, accepted as a term. Because anything that veers towards, a more feminist ideal of things has always been seen as very negative. So in my path of coming into Unitarian Universalism, I finally found a place where it fit me because everyone was celebrated, not just one entity. And I enjoyed coming into the congregations because it just felt like unity. When I first came into the church, I was afraid, like many gay people are, afraid of being stigmatized, afraid of being somehow judged and ostracized and whatnot, what many gay people carry. And I learned my love of my grandfather's sermons and preaching and belief systems were part of this culture that really put power and privilege above all else, and that was to white supremacy thinking. And at first, when I heard this term, I thought, well, I'm white. I'm in positions of power. I'm a powerful woman. Does that mean I'm a supremacist of some sort? And I did not want to believe that because I had, been a social worker. And so what I'm going to share with you today is how I recognized and realized that I contribute to white supremacy culture, and that we all do. All of us that live in this country, because it's systemically interwoven into everything that we do. Our entire system of care is part of white supremacy culture because it is a hierarchy. And anytime you have a hierarchy, a bureaucracy, you have individual people that are on your front line, and their voices don't always get heard. And there is a disconnect between leadership and those that are in power and those that really know the issues. And so I, in my values of social work, which are very aligned with Unitarian Universalists, our first value is service to our community and to everyone, not just one entity. Our second is social justice. And our third and fourth is the dignity and worth of all people and the importance of human relationships. And then competency and integrity. But when I realized that I was contributing to this because of what I was doing in academia, I had spent 15 years in academia and thinking I was doing, justice work, and realizing I was contributing to systemic racism and oppression, I had a meltdown, an absolute meltdown. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today, is how this happened. So I have a few quotes that are on here that are from Robin DiAngelo, and there are many books that are out there right now. This book, I think, is one that is a very academic book, but it is a very important book because it is courageous and vulnerable at the same time. It allows us to look at these issues in a way in which we cannot refute what's happening and going on. So the first one is about whiteness and accepting our whiteness, accepting what that means and understanding how heavy our footprint is. And our responsibility that we have then while we carry that power. And then being able to challenge what it means to be a good, moral, value-laden, ethical person, and to make sure that that is aligned fully. And not in some sort of inauthenticity in transaction relationships versus transformational ones. So I have another quote that's on here, and it is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it says, "Never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal." And so sometimes, due to our human nature, those that are in power and authority, we sometimes give a pass. Because we are unaware of everything that they're doing. We elect individuals to represent us. And although we live in this very challenging, tough climate, at least things are being exposed so that people can see reality in a different way and understand that we have a duty. All of us do. If we want a beloved community, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted, we have a duty to each other. And so these characteristics are things that we all participate in some way, shape, or form. And I've participated in every single one of them. And I make it a point every single day to challenge myself on these things because I go out into the systems of care. I go out into social services. I go out into academia. I'm in it every day. I'm in the community. And I have to remember because I grew up in this. So, perfectionism. How many of you are perfectionists? Yes. A sense of urgency. And this is got to have what I want, when I want it, and I want it right now. Instant gratification that our society kind of perpetuates. Defensiveness, to be held accountable for when we do make mistakes. And we do make mistakes. We always make mistakes because we're human. But we have this idea in our mind that making a mistake means we're imperfect. But we learn best when we do make those mistakes. Quality over quantity, or quantity over quality, shall I say. More is better. Worship of our written word rather than our conversations that we have with one another. It has to be written in stone, and if it's not written down somewhere, it didn't happen. Only one right way. Paternalism, which is kind of like micromanaging, feeling like you have to do everything and not being able to trust or delegate. Either or thinking, meaning there's only two options, dichotomy, power hoarding, and that's fear. You know, fear that you can't share your power with other people for, you know, some reason that we think, you know, a person might not align with who we are. Fear of open conflict, which relates to defensivism. Individualism, which I see so much in our culture. I'm the only one, progress is bigger, more, objectivity, and the right to comfort. So my doctorate degree is in nonprofit management, human service leadership, public service leadership, and of course my master's is in macro social work, which is a little bit different than micro social work. It has to do with community organizing and capacity building, looking into more research, program evaluation, and development. When I started working in nonprofit, I chose nonprofit because I thought it was a more noble way to do the business that I wanted to do in social work. But when I got into it, I found that it was just as hierarchical and business-driven as any other corporation. And I found it very difficult to follow through with mission and vision. What we wanted to do in social work was a strengths-based empowerment perspective, and I don't even like the word empowerment. Because empowerment says what? That I have power and I'm giving it to you. So there's a hierarchy right there. I want to liberate people. And the only way I can liberate them is to stand next to them and to raise voices in what they are, their authenticity, their genuineness, not my power to give to you. So I saw this. And being a white woman in nonprofit, I also saw how tokenism happened. How when we talked about diversity and inclusion, it was make sure that you have people of color and black individuals to be part of your nonprofit because that means you're diverse. Not if you don't change the way in which you're doing things. Not unless everyone that comes in to your organization is truly valued and that difference of doing and being and showing up is valued. So, disavowal of power, obsession with the future, performative anti-racism, which is exactly what I'm talking about, over-delivering, being polite above all else, and confusing informality with equity. Now, niceness above all else, this is something that is part of white supremacy culture, that to be a woman in our culture means to be polite. Because if you're not polite, what does that say? Right? That you hate men somehow. Right? Because if you're a feminist, that's what that means, right? You hate men. But that's the misconception, right? And if you are not polite, and not being polite means that you hold people accountable. You call people out on things that are going on and might be impacting a system of oppression and racism. But when you do that, and you're a woman and you stand on the value of feminism, you're seen as somebody that might hate the androcentric world that you live in. So how it showed up in my work. I was a perfectionist. I've been a perfectionist my entire life. I always wanted to be the best. I always wanted to do the best. I always wanted to succeed. I was competitive. I wanted to be number one at everything. I still do. I don't know if that will ever change. But I have always done it as a way to challenge my own shortcomings. But the fact that I saw shortcomings in myself tells you a lot. Concentration of power, including power hoarding, paternalism, and defensiveness. Once I started to work in my profession, I noticed that there was a scarcity of resource, and knowledge is power. And if you didn't have security, that power somehow made you fragile. And I worked in an institution for 15 years as an instructor without tenure, and I was very scared. I was very scared because, number one, I didn't have insurance until I started in 2003, and I didn't get insurance until 2013. And so I worked a very long time doing a lot of work that I felt was quality work, but not protected. And so I got very scared, and I started to withhold information from people, power hoard. Somehow I thought that that would lead me into a tenured position, and that was more important than anything for me at the time. The right to comfort, including fear of open conflict. Because I was so polite and because I was such a people pleaser and also a codependent individual, I did not want to upset anyone. And so what ended up happening, though, is I was very silent, very quiet, and I had a voice. I had something to say, but I wouldn't say it because I was fearful. This would jeopardize my career. This would jeopardize my job. I would not get what I wanted. And so I needed to somehow maneuver and manipulate my way by being an individual and not sharing, by rising to the top of wherever it was I was going. I did so alone and was not willing to share a lot. But nobody would have ever said that about me. They always would have commented that I was kind and sweet and nice and would never do something like that. Progress is bigger, more, including objectivity, quantity over quality, and a sense of urgency. And this was something that every time we would get a grant idea or every time we would get an opportunity that would enhance our program, I jumped on it. But why was I jumping on it? Was I jumping on it for me to secure my future, or was I jumping on it because it would benefit everyone? And I never knew exactly why, but I know that there was an underpinning of fear. So when you start to look at what white supremacy culture does to you, and when you're in it, you don't know, just like any abusive situation that you may find yourself in, you know, a relationship or whatever it is, you sometimes don't know you're in it until you get out of it and then you see. So on the one hand is white supremacy culture, on the other hand is an anti-racist culture. And when I started to see this, I was like, oh, wow, okay. I don't like to rock the boat. That was me. I mostly value intellect, data, and facts. I choose comfort. I feel a sense of urgency and a need to fix things. I'm thick-skinned and competitive. I tend to judge people who feel differently. I feel absolutes. I value outcomes and finished products. I tend to blame others when tensions erupt. I care most about my individual status. When I saw that I was doing that, somehow underneath everything that I was horrified. Because I had pledged to my values and principles and beliefs of social work, service, social justice, dignity and worth of all people, the importance of human relationships, my competency and my integrity. How could I be on that other side? I was an anti-racist, but was I? White privilege is the societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, or economic circumstance. Where I was in my social work was at equality. I used to use this term all the time, equality. But what do you see in this picture of equality? Even equity, which is a term that's used quite often, what do you see? The reality we know. And now I understand that to be an anti-racist, to confront white privilege and white fragility and white supremacy thinking is to liberate, which means to dismantle power This is for when I teach this in class. So we can do this if you'd like to, but it's a bingo game. And what you do is you check your privilege. Why is it such a challenge? What is white privilege? What is white fragility? What is white supremacy thinking, and why is it such a challenge? When white people react in this way, it centers them in a conversation about race and racism, which should be about, quote, the victim, people who are on the receiving end of racism and discrimination. White fragility allows white people to not be held accountable for their actions. It places the value of intent over impact. I didn't intend to do all of those things, although I did do them. It allows white people to govern when and how race and racism are discussed. This reinforces a racial equilibrium that upholds these characteristics that I'm talking about and the thinking that governs our institutions of power. And when you really look at it, it's a form of gaslighting. The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. So to avoid these things, and there are some resources that Jean included, if we want to avoid these things, and this was something that once I realized I was contributing to it, I was doing it, it's part of our institutions, I stopped feeling guilty that I was doing it, and I committed to changing it. I no longer want to be part of that system. I no longer want to participate in any of that. And to be an anti-racist means that you are, in reality, you realize that you're not perfect, you're going to make mistakes in this work, you're not going to be able to solve everything. But you can make a commitment to changing it in your everyday life. So there's no such thing as reverse racism, which means white racism, because white privilege and power are at the hierarchy. There's no such thing as colorblindness. There is, but it has to do with the eyes, right? Racism is not always overt due to racist society that we live in. We're all capable of it, even internal racism, because of this structure, the way that we have. We internalize what's not perfect or perceived in our ideology as perfect. Simply speaking about race is not racist. You're never done unlearning racism, so this is ingrained into all of us. There's no shame in being wrong, only refusing to learn. And so I will leave you with this. If you want to address white privilege, white fragility, and dismantle white supremacy culture, commit to these terms when confronted with it. I didn't realize that. Thank you for correcting me. I hadn't thought of it like that. I understand now. I was wrong about that, and I've changed my mind. And I should do more research on this before I argue this point. So when we start to do this, and when we start to address racism in our own lives, in our everyday lives, how we contribute to those white supremacy characteristics, then we become more collective. We become more transformational in our relationships with one another and less transactional. We start to look more subjective into the narratives of people and their stories. And that's how we become, aware of how this type of thinking has harmed all of us. And we do this together. That last candle that I lit for us all, because we're in it together. And the only way that we'll be able to address it is if we first address it in ourselves and then commit to liberating all of us. Thank you.
Our closing hymn is 118, This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
A responsive reading, a network of mutuality. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope.